You are listening to an MLGA Network podcast.
Welcome to Thank You for Your Servers, a show which looks at the tech news of today, but from a libertarian perspective. Now here are your hosts, Thaddeus and Gary.
Thank you for logging on to Thank You for Your Servers. I'm Thaddeus Preston, aka Nick Way, and joining me once again, my boy, my man, Gary Guthrie. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing fantastic.
All right. Hey, this is our mostly, almost kind of weekly rants about the tech topics of the week from a Liberty perspective. This and other podcasts are brought to you by the Make Liberty Great Again network of podcasts. Give us a listen and give our other compatriots a listen on the Make Liberty Great Again network. So, with no further ado, Gary, man, kick it off, man, because I've been waiting for the story.
This story's been killing me. I when I first saw it, I think I first saw it on Fox News, which immediately kind of made me take a second glance at it. But the fact that this company, FireEye Security, is putting on a security conference in October of this year, October 7th through 10th or something like that. Anyhow, supposedly big security conference, everything. And the big news that came out of it was the headliner, the keynote speaker, the top number one security expert coming in to deliver their notes on the security landscape of today, Hillary Rodham Clinton. What do you think about that, Thaddeus?
Cluck a duck. That is, the irony is astonishing. So let me get this straight. The poster child for, because this, I guess, this is a cyber defense summit, right? This is a cybersecurity conference where these CEOs and CIOs of these major companies that are in this space are going to sit down and have a Q&A and watch Hillary Rodham Clinton wax eloquent about cybersecurity issues. Why? What? As a cautionary tale of what not to do? I mean, what the...
I can't even understand what content she could give that would contribute to anything to do with cybersecurity, to be honest.
Well, to quote her last failed book, it's probably more of a Q&A of what happened when it came to the email servers and the hacking and the other things. Like, she is the chief example of the type of employee you do not want if you were a CIO or a CTO of any company. Like, she's the employee you don't want. It's like, what? Wait. So you had a server at home and you were like conducting business on a non-VPN, non-secured, non-firewalled server in your basement?
Unbelievable. I mean, as a director of IT myself, if you don't have policy, if you don't have process, if you don't have procedure, and if you can't put teeth behind it, you're not doing your job, and when I heard originally, the whole email fiasco of her doing her own thing outside of government knowledge and all this stuff, which, there's clearly some really shady things that went on with that whole thing. 3 hard drives that failed and they couldn't search, and they all failed at the exact same time on 3 different machines. Yeah, right. But that all aside, I don't know. This whole thing just boggles my mind. And the only thing that makes sense to me is that this FireEye company is trying to get in a little deeper on the political side so that they can get some favors returned to them in the form of either government contracts or more leverage to create more regulations and more compliance requirements that they can, as a service company, provide services so that companies can stay compliant with. These are the only things that make sense to me with this whole decision.
But in 2019, how much juice does Hillary Rodham Clinton, even being a former U.S. Secretary of State, how much juice does she actually have? I know there's an incestuous relationship in the Beltway. This company, this company FireEye, actually in 2013 bought a subsidiary that did cybersecurity based out of Alexandria, Virginia. Maniped, I think, is what it's called. Or Manaded, I can't remember, Mandiant, I guess, because, my public school education doesn't allow me to pronounce that correctly. So, they already kind of have a foothold in the region. Yeah, to me, it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of juice involved, but there might be because of this incestuous relationship between Washington, D.C., because for everyone who hates everything the Trump administration stands for, the deep state is a pretty semi-permanent fixture. So maybe she does. Maybe this is just an opportunity to do that. Maybe it's throw her some bones, right? This is really kind of a third-tier cybersecurity conference, in my opinion, personally, given off by one company. So it's not that she's getting like the high-powered talk she used to get, pre-2016, where she's talking to Goldman Sachs in back rooms for $10,000 a plate or whatever the hell she was getting paid. But that aside, she is definitely a poster child for cybersecurity, but not in a positive sense. If that Q&A session if there's no humility in that Q&A session where she can kind of explain but then I guess she really can't get up there in a Q&A and explain how she screwed up, because then that would be an admission of guilt, and she did get off.
Oh yeah. Clearly, yeah. She got the golden ticket out of that. But you're right. From a practical standpoint, from a relevant standpoint, what weight does she have? Nothing. She reminds me a lot of our AP manager, who every other day is sending me an email saying, "Is this legit? Should I click on the link?" And it's clearly not. It's clearly, which ones I'm talking about, Here's your invoice. Open this Word document to see your invoice, and
it's funny because, they're in a broader cybersecurity industry these attacks happen constantly to people. I assume this person who sends you these emails and asking you if they're legit is fairly higher up in the hierarchy of the company.
She is.
And so to me, you deal with it all the time, right? I don't understand. I just sat through, ironically enough, a cybersecurity talk given by a guy from the University of Texas, Austin, where he was basically explaining the anatomy of the attack, the anatomy of the attack that happened with Equifax. And how long how long it took them to patch it, to discover it, the time it took to patch it, and the time it took to tell everybody, oh yeah, by the way, this happened, right? And there was some consequences to be associated with it, right? Everyone in the C-suite got fired / golden parachutes, but the crux of this talk, and just to kind of circle back to Secretary Clinton here, is the way cybersecurity is probably needing to work in the future is not to mention, yes, having the policies that are written down, having the policies that with teeth. But at the end of the day, when you have humans in the loop, man, you got to design and architect systems so that when humans do screw it up, it can be detected and it can be isolated and siloed. One of the things we discussed in this cybersecurity talk that I went to was completely re-architecting the way cybersecurity, the way authentication works between the web front end, a authentication layer, and then basically spinning up authenticated, in this instance, microservice containers, Docker, if for any of our audience is familiar with Docker, and spinning up these very specific instances with these very specific authentications to touch sections of the database that are encrypted for the very session. Depending on whatever. And it does require a lot of front end re-architecting, code refactoring, a lot of code, a lot of really breaking architecturally the code down to different areas so that they're siloed enough so that there's interaction points between the web front end, the authentication back end, and then the authentication back end that spins up the instances, the microservice instances that then can talk to the database. So it takes 1 or 2 or 3 hops to even get to it. And even if a hacker gets through all that, they only get to the sliver of the database for which it is, which the let's assume it's Secretary Clinton, who has compromised all of her two-factor authentication in anything. They only have access to that one section. And, so, and to me, like, between machine learning, statistical methods, and just the way we re-architect these very dispersed web applications for cybersecurity is going to be the future and stuff like that. I use that to kind of dovetail into, like, there's a lot of ways to get it. I mean, there's side channel methods of getting at your data, to the point where you have actually people, if they have access to any of the power diagnostics of your system, they could literally figure out what you're doing, the data, what type of data.
Absolutely, they can.
Crap, you're processing a lot of data, and from a statistical standpoint, you're processing a lot of data based on your power signature. Even for particularly mobile applications, you can literally figure out what people are typing based on the power consumption, based on how much power it takes and how much time it takes to render a certain alphabet. You can literally fill in gaps from a side channel attack. And with these machine learning algorithms and these statistical methods, to think that that the good guys are only going to have the machine learning and the artificial intelligence and the advanced neural networks and the what they call the adversarial neural networks to combat these attacks, that stuff is open source. Someone can nefariously take that, use that, and then use that to figure out what website you're going to based on your power consumption, right? Based on what your batteries are doing. And like, it's hard, but like, if you do it enough times for long enough, they can figure out you went to CNN, you typed in this. Oh, you're taking a picture. Okay, you're doing this, you're doing that. I mean, these are the tools of spycraft that have probably been around for a long time, but like, these things are out there, and like.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what Ms. Hillary Clinton has to say about all that in October.
I am waiting on bated breath here to figure out what our overlord says.
I can only sit here and guess. I mean, my money, honestly, is on. I got to put together a drinking game, because we got to find this thing on YouTube or something once she does it. And, every time she blames her loss of the presidency on something, we have to take a drink or something. But anyway. Moving on.
Yeah, because we could go on that forever. So SpaceX finally got the first half of its first portion of its
60. How many was it? 60 of them, right?
Yeah, there were 60 of them in this particular instance. And so they're up in the air. Sort of a triumph. This is going to be part of maybe the 12,000 that eventually end up in up there. But with progress always comes people who are going to say, however. So I guess a Harvard Smithsonian kind of astrologist or some sort of guy. His name is Jonathan McDowell. Observed that the internet satellites are bright enough to cause a problem for astronomy, and the eventual constellation of 12,000 satellites. I mean, that's a lot. Could complicate humanity's view of the night sky. It would triple the number of satellites in orbit, forcing telescope operators to account for the objects. I get their concern, but wah. All right. The great promise for ubiquitous global space-based like internet connectivity, it's kind of a big deal. It's going to help. I mean, but at what cost to the view of the night sky? I mean, what do we?
I don't know. I'm kind of torn on it a little bit, just because I kind of get it. Honestly, one of my guilty pleasures is the science shows where they talk about the black holes and all this stuff. And so I'll sit there and I'll watch that for 2 hours until it drives my wife nuts and she has to go to bed. But at the same time, you're right. I mean, we have to we have to make progress in more than one way, right? I mean, and there's going to be some give and take.
But at what cost, right? And I think that it's kind of one of my things when it comes to like GMOs, right? Like we can all, as kind of good-natured hippies, be like, "That's GMOs, man. They're terrible, man." Yeah, but if it wasn't for them GMOs, right, or at least the methods for which GMOs are based, there'd be 1 billion dead people in India from starvation. So what do we want, right? I mean, from a liberty angle perspective, I believe the cost of progress is worth marching forward with deploying these tools because they're going to democratize information access. Like 12,000 satellites in orbit, and it will definitely drive down the cost of instead of using very expensive iridium or what's the one that HughesNet and stuff like that. This will definitely drive down the cost of satellite internet, which inevitably will give people in far-flung parts of the world, in the jungles, and I'm even thinking about taking a trip to the canyon lands here, for which you're going to have little to no phone connectivity in these areas. You will have GPS, but only to make an emergency plea if you're dead or dying. Right. But yeah, I think that's important. I think it's a necessary. I don't want to call it evil, but it's a necessary downside to it. And like they were saying, like all they're going to have to do is just keep up with more objects. And to think that we're going to be the only, like SpaceX is going to be the only company in the world that will put up 12,000 of these. Come on, man. The Chinese are going to put up probably 10 times these. The Europeans are going to put up these as well. And so to me,
this is true.
So you're going to have to you're already having to track space junk anyway. It just becomes a harder problem.
Well, and also when you think about, the progress we've made in space exploration and the technology that we've used, I mean, even going back to the 80s with the Hubble Space Telescope, right? We'll be able to put stuff up that's past these things. I mean, is it going to impact a backyard astronomer? I don't think so. I mean, if I go out and buy a $200 telescope and point it up at Jupiter, I could probably still see Jupiter just fine. And plus, the big concerns that they raised, as one of the articles I was reading, was at a time when these satellites are still nowhere near their final orbit. They're still very low, they're still very bright, but as they get up, they're going to dim and they're going to become less of an issue. Now, is 12,000 of them going to make a difference? I don't know.
I think I can tell you from experience, we greatly underestimate the sheer size of space in the orbit and
right.
Earth orbit. We've been sending satellites and crap up there for nearly 50 years, and it's, with the exception of maybe once or twice, there have been very few collisions. And so yeah, I don't think, depending on how they these orbits are, I don't think it's going to have that much of an effect. I mean, unlike, I don't want to get into the scare tactics like that people are using with 5G, where 95% of their hysteria about it is silly and 5% is something to be investigated. Because I know I'd read a story the other day where like it's going to mess with radar, so it'll make it harder to so radar is going to have to use other types of kind of blanking algorithms and stuff, so that because I guess the 5G may interfere at certain frequencies and stuff, but that remains to be seen. I mean, that's always been the issue with.
So you're saying there's an opportunity for more innovation.
Yes, that is the much positive spin to put on it. There are more opportunities for innovation, and I hope we get the full constellation up, because I look forward to having even more connectivity and ubiquity when I go to places like Canyonlands, or I go to places like Lagos, Nigeria, or not even Lagos, Nigeria, Ohafia, Nigeria, in the river states and the hinterlands of the continent of Africa. This is a good thing. We will engineer and find a way around this.
And you know what? And like you said, how much of this is panic and how much of this is real? Well, I think the panic a lot of times, especially in this, if we look at just this instance, we just sent these 60 satellites up. One of the things that I think is kind of underplayed in one of the articles that I had read is they have built into these things the ability to control them and say destroy, and they'll just send it into the atmosphere and it'll be gone. So there are contingencies in place in the event that there's some catastrophic human calamity that happens because we can't see this star over here.
Yeah, I think, yeah, right. I think there are ways to track and algorithmically look around or look through or find, you're just going to have to, we're going to have to share the night sky at some point, ladies and gentlemen. All right. And now on to the kind of the meat of the program, and that is the increasing calls for the breakup of big tech. Quoting a story I got from The Verge, politicians on both sides have been ramping up their rhetoric. Elizabeth Warren has made breaking up tech companies the rallying cry for a presidential campaign. And the Republican lawmakers on the other side have laid in the Silicon Valley elite for their perceived anti-conservative bias. So now we're going after big tech. Now it's time to break up big tech. And my liberty spiny senses are tingling, Gary. I don't like this. I don't like this at all.
Yeah, both of them just reek of control and let tech be.
Right. I mean, I know right now that on the radical right and radical left or libertarian right or whatever you want to side yourself with, I know the reaction is to strike out against these companies because these companies are politically progressive and they're using their power and their monopoly to do a bait and switch for a lot of creators, and they're doing a whole lot. But here's the deal: the cost to break up big tech and the subsequent antitrust investigations that are going to kick off on Capitol Hill or in DC are the powers that be falling out of love with big tech. I've read too many stories over the last couple of weeks about how, all right, let me go back a little bit. I remember when Washington, D.C., the tech press was enamored with big tech. For the love of God, they made a movie about being an intern at Google that had Owen Wilson and what's the other guy who was in it? They made Wedding Crashers, right? And so they made.
Oh, you're talking. What's this? The tall guy, right?
Yes, that guy. Anyway.
Okay.
So, basically, long story short, I mean, there was this love affair with big tech and stuff like that. And so as time went on, though, and it became quite apparent that these companies were growing in power because at the end of the day, because this antitrust things are all about trying to break up monopolies and perceived big companies that are perceived to be harming the consumer as a whole. They got that way by giving to people a product that they want. But now they're falling out of love with big tech. But I think like I remember watching a episode of Tom Merritt's show that talks about tech, and he brought up an excellent point. This is no different because this is a new technology that has reach that undermines the political power of the elite, and particularly the political power of the imperial headquarters that is Washington, D.C. And they did the same thing with radio. They did the same thing with television. And this attempt is really just to regulate them because they ultimately want control of how the messaging is. They want control of this medium because it's a medium that they can use to push their political power. So every time the powers that be feel threatened from a new technology or platform that is beginning to displace their power and influence, they seem to call for the subsequent breakup via a convoluted and Byzantine, basically process of antitrust.
Well, and how convenient that they already have a base who will subscribe to the idea that this is a threat to the individual, which it really isn't.
And here's the deal. This would normally be one of those things where the left or the right would be defenders of a private company's ability, like, hey, don't get mad because Amazon's big. Don't get mad because Facebook's big. This is ultimate beautiful entrepreneur. This is America. This is like, yeah, America. Until the people in power feel that this thing that is America, this monster that they have allowed to be created, I mean, the hubris in thinking that's true. Subsequently, they don't really have control over it. They're banning people who they like from the platform. Truth be told, I said this back in like 2011 and 12 that like, yo, you need to be very, very careful. Because there's these calls for censoring in tech and for the government to be involved in, certain things and dealing with the platforms and stuff. You better be damn careful what you guys are asking for now, because there will come a time when like the political winds will turn against it. But Silicon Valley was arrogant and had absolutely no humility. And they had the hubris to believe that they will always be like liked and loved in DC. They even did the opposite of what Microsoft did, and they started putting people in power in DC for lobbying purposes. But what they're finding is this is a much dirtier game when dealing with political power. So Senator Warren's plan is completely asinine. I've read bits and pieces of it. It doesn't make any sense. If you haven't read the news lately, Google, or we call Alphabet or whatever, has had a terrible quarter. They're not the behemoth they are. And it's funny because I was reading an article the other day from The Verge, which I typically they do very well. I mean, they're part of the dreaded and hated Vox, but they do a pretty good job. There was so much lack of history and understanding about how Facebook acquired Instagram and WhatsApp. So they want them to. So the plan is to break up Facebook. That's one example of what Senator Warren is talking about, is breaking up Facebook into the three constituent parts. They want to break up Facebook from Instagram and from WhatsApp, saying that they should have, and what's part of the language in this article was like, and Facebook was allowed to buy Instagram.
Allowed?
Let me give you some. Here's the deal. Instagram was literally 10 freaking people. When Facebook bought them.
Right.
They weren't, hence, the government has no say-so because they were both at the time private companies. They're not publicly traded, right? The only time the government should be allowed, and probably is allowed, to actually say yay or nay to a merger or acquisition is if the companies are both public.
Right.
And so that just shows the ignorance of this author, who doesn't even know. It's like, and WhatsApp was 50 people, right? It wasn't in a private company. And again, I think WhatsApp was bought shortly before Facebook went public. So the DOJ or the FTC or whoever these anointed, these leftist journalists are ignorant and goddamn government schools would have had no input in the acquisition of these companies. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, how are you going to break up these companies when, from a technological standpoint, they're integrated? I mean, their infrastructure is integrated. Their authentication is integrated.
It's one animal. You can't carve out the liver from the cow and expect it to live. It's not going to work.
And it's kind of what we discussed in the last episode. Like, there's just this hatred of big.
Exactly. And that's where I'm going with it. When I hear about this stuff, Elizabeth Warren, she's got her presidential run coming up, and I'm so looking forward to the debates with her. You have to, if you're shooting for something as ambitious as the presidency of the United States, you are going to latch on to the largest, most media generating, newsworthy things that are out there. And what better thing to do than to tackle Facebook and say, oh my God, we have a problem and I'm going to solve it. Right?
Yes. And they cry out for a king, and God told them, you sure you want a king? Right. And now
Yeah, and I say this all the time. I look at the behavior of people, and they want a dictator. They want a single person in power. Nobody cares about process. They don't care about Congress. They don't care. All they care about is the president of the United States. Okay.
Yeah. No, it's and yeah, they don't understand it. Like, I mean, you're ruining when you ask the government to intervene. You're going to ruin the thing that made these companies dynamic and useful, and what made them pure, what made them good. The political process, I find, and particularly they're having to get in bed with the government now, really, because this is the shakedown. Like these calls to break up, and of course there's tons and tons of investigations into. There's going to be tons and tons of investigations coming from the FTC, the Justice Department, that are going to basically strangle the rest of the innocents from these companies. Like, these companies, they deserve it because they've acted kind of foolishly in the past couple of years, but it's kind of the end of an era. And I think this is the beginning of what I would like to, is what I always say, is this is the anatomy of regulatory capture. This is going to happen, and you're not going to like it. And it's very unfortunate. These antitrust cases are going to pick these companies apart. And the tech press is calling for it and calling for it and calling for it. This is the same tech press. This is the same tech press that if they were around during the Microsoft era, who would have, most of them sort of were. And they were calling for regulation of Microsoft. You got to stop Microsoft. Microsoft's a monopoly. And then they went through this brutal 5-6 year antitrust fight. And then the very same tech press within the same decade after Microsoft ultimately won. But it was a Pyrrhic victory because the company was a former shell of itself for at least a decade. And then you had these same tech press owners like, but there's no innovation or anything coming out of Microsoft. Yeah, because they were browbeaten by antitrust
enforcement. Yeah, no kidding, right?
Right? And so these things, these wonderful things that Alphabet is giving us, despite the fact that they might be filled with a bunch of progressive crybabies, and God, we can discuss ad nauseum about really, we don't need regulation or anything like that to try to foster free speech. The culture is sick and corroded, and these people, they have their worldview, and they live in their bubble, and they don't understand. And God help them. You just want to hug them and be like, "Hey, it'll be okay," but you don't want to kill at least that innovative spirit that has given us things like cloud service, Microsoft and Google's and Amazon's cloud services, and for all the hatred of Facebook. I mean, it's brought us together, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It still brings people together. It's, and because you have human beings who don't understand human beings and how tools work, and how sometimes human beings abuse these tools and stuff like that, and they think that they can algorithmically get rid of bad behavior, and you're not. You just have to embrace the fact that you've just created a platform for human beings, and human beings inherently are flawed, and they're going to do terrible things.
You know what? You bring up a real good kind of thing that touches on my point of view with the whole situation. Is I think, and I believe honestly in my heart of hearts, that we have neglected to address anything from a cultural standpoint, from a values standpoint, from a norms standpoint, before we go to the government. It's like the government's it's the goat. You know what I equate it to? It's like an HOA, right?
Yeah.
And
yeah, we love those.
Oh God, no, we don't. But in a couple of the groups that I'm in online, I see it all the time. Someone complains about their neighbor on this group. What do I do about this? And the immediate response is, have you called your HOA? Have you called the sheriff? Blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, well, have you knocked on their door? Have you talked to them? Can we have a conversation on what we agree on and what we disagree on before we go to the government and say, okay, give us the rules, oh mighty rulers of ours, so that everything can be fair. How about we handle some of this stuff at a cultural level? Are we unable to do it anymore? I don't know.
It doesn't really sound like we can. I mean, as we're recording this, right? I mean, this is the week we're coming off of where a Vox reporter threw a hissy fit and complained to Mama Daddy YouTube about comedian Steven Crowder, debunking him sort of viciously on his channel and trying to get him thrown off of YouTube. He ultimately succeeded in getting Crowder demonetized. But there's you could have engaged Mr. Crowder at his ideas, right? Because no offense, I'm much more sympathetic to the Crowder point of view when it comes to debunking a lot of these really silly Vox videos.
Definitely.
That are like forgiving Antifa and saying like, well, socialism really isn't that bad. I'm like, what are you kidding me? As feel good as that is, I understand that socialism is kind of this, all the hearts and the feels, but there's still a body count to accommodate with that. But they didn't handle it like men. I mean, they could have, they both kind of went to the Twitter and in their respective corners and feigned victimhood. But it's this type of kind of uneven action which has basically turned the right against these platforms, and now you have a two-pronged attack coming from the right and the left. Right, the left always hates and wants to destroy and bring down these platforms when they become too big for their britches and stuff like that, particularly if they lose control of the ability to drive the narrative. When they were driving the narrative on Facebook and Twitter and Google and whatever, then they didn't care. But when they ceased to drive the narrative because there were other maybe competing points of view, some of them reprehensible, other of them are, I'm sympathetic to, then they want to be like, well, we got to get these people off of here. And so let me break down what all the antitrust cases that are coming up for the big four, right? So the big four basically are Facebook, Google, Amazon, and Apple. They're all going to be facing generally different types of antitrust investigations. So the first one I find that always infuriates me is the fact that the Federal Trade Commission is going to start investigating whether Cambridge Analytica data privacy stuff, whether or not there was a data breach in 2008, and so part of the there was a data breach, I guess, in 2011, and so they did a consent decree with the FTC, but they're going to reinvestigate the Cambridge Analytica thing on this side of the Atlantic because Facebook got dragged over the coals over on the other side of Atlantic in England because the powers that be hated the Brexit vote, and Cambridge Analytica was pretty instrumental in the data front of really getting out the vote for Brexit in England. And so people were pissed about that and hating on Facebook. So because of that scandal, which happened after this 2011 consent decree that it signed with the Federal Trade Commission, the Federal Trade Commission then wants to investigate, hey, did you violate the consent decree because of this data breach? And that's that multi-billion dollar, $5-6 billion settlement that they're going to probably have to pay out. And so that's Facebook's cross to bear, not to mention the fact that you have presidential candidates and senators asking and maybe wanting to have discussions about breaking up the company. Google, the Department of Justice is probably preparing an antitrust case against Google to focus on the search giant's other businesses. Particularly, this is the same crap that the EU brought up with Google about 10 years ago, or whether or not it's, recommending its stuff or its searches or preferred search partners who've paid more at the top of advertisements or whatever. And then, of course, there's the obligatory privacy concerns. Amazon is dealing with it because, what is it? According to the Journal, FTC has granted jurisdiction over the certain competition issues, according to the Journal, pertaining to its acquisition of Whole Foods. There's no investigation underway, but it's likely to start coming soon. Basically, they're going to start investigating that. And for Apple, we discussed this last episode, I think, about, the App Store dominance. And, right. And of course, now there's going to be pressure for them they're going to require developers to use the Sign with Apple tool. That could be to the detriment of Google sign in, Facebook sign in, Snap sign in, and stuff like that. So they're going to look at that. And so you have all these vectors of attack, and it's going to make it hard because what will come out of all these attacks are new rules, not necessarily in regulations, that will make it harder for there to be another Apple, Amazon, Google, or Facebook. Period. Because ultimately they're going to want to stop the bleeding. They're going to want to stop these guys from like coming after them. They're like, as I kind of said in previous episodes, Facebook is not completely the villain in asking for regulation because they just want to know the rules of the road. And this is why free markets don't work well, and we digress into cronyism. This is just the anatomy of it. You're seeing it piece by piece. And the useful, I hate to say it, useful idiots in the press and the tech press are going to lead this charge. Like we were saying before, it's rap music. It's rock music.
It's the Satan worshiping, backwards masking.
Yeah. It's almost like bootleggers and Baptists, but just move it to the present day, where you have two institutions who are now who appear to be adversarial are now in cahoots to bring big tech under its control because it wants to control the narrative, control the message. There's going to be a lot of this crap in the 2020 election. You mark my words about how.
Let me ask.
News.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. But I want to kind of ask a sideways question on that. Do you believe, because the way it seems to me is it kind of, again, it goes back to opening up the innovation a little bit. Does this open up avenues for people to innovate a little bit and go kind of underground with a lot of the social media or whatever?
Well, it's funny you asked that. Well, our mutual friend Ryan is working on such a platform. But here's where I have some long-term optimism, but short-term skepticism. So this is the case of things like Gab. Gab is a Twitter competitor. Gab built their platform on Microsoft Azure, and they used domain registrars that they could use because of the nature of some of the traffic that was on Gab. They not only lost Azure as their platform, as their cloud provider when it comes to scaling their platform, i.e. their service. They have had to play whack-a-mole, or at least piggy, or they've had to play tadpoles, jumping from pad to pad, for their DNS in their registrar. So
who's driving that though? I mean, that's not centralized. That's
just it's the guilt by adjacent association.
Wow.
And by virtue of that, as opposed to, so it's not easy to be on these cloud platforms if there's something objectionable happening on your platform that you've deployed on these services. So that does not mean that you did anything necessarily illegal, or that you're, recruiting, white supremacist terrorists to go, commit mass murder and genocide against, LGBTQ people. It could just be something as simple as the new YouTube standards say, I might have some people very outspoken on abortion on my platform. I might have people very outspoken about, immigration on my platform. And if enough of the mob, I don't know who this nebulous mob is, gets to Google or Amazon or Microsoft, who are right now your 1, 2, and 3 cloud providers, they could say, hey man, you got to get off our cloud platform. Well, you got 48 hours to move your data and do whatever. This happened to Gab.
Wow.
Cloudflare did the same thing with much more disreputable sites. The Daily Stormer, VDare, American Renaissance. These are kind of white supremacist sites, but they lost their registrar. They couldn't publish their website. They couldn't do it.
So here's the net effect that I see from this kind of, I guess, top-down prohibition or whatever. It's going to drive these things further underground. It's going to drive the animal farther into the corner and ultimately just strengthen it. Don't you agree? I mean, we've seen it.
Yeah, no, we've seen it all the time. It's funny. The first or second generation of white supremacists were driven underground in the late 90s, early 2000s, never to be heard from again. Right? Wrong.
No.
To think that your enemy won't adapt to your tactics, which is what the alt-right is. The alt-right is nothing more than just a beautiful veneer with very no offense to all my woke audience, which there are a grand total of 2 of you. But they're very compelling arguments if you don't think about them deeply.
Right.
And so to think that, my fear is that these people will be pushed back underground and they'll reemerge again, but much more covert.
Right. And that kind of goes to my question of innovation is what kind of things are these people going to dream up? Because you're not going to kill them this way.
Yeah, I think I've been a big believer in BitChute. And they seem pretty, but though I have noticed that BitChute has not been very responsive lately, and I think it's because a lot of people who were kind of purged off of YouTube this week moved over to BitChute, and I don't think the guys can handle it. I mean, you have, we have platforms like, would Glenn Beck's The Blaze create something along the lines of a YouTube? No, it's hard to do, right? The scale necessary to be a YouTube is kind of like the scale it was to be Facebook versus. But
I don't think that's the goal. I think the goal is just to kind of hone your focus on your audience,
on a particular audience and group,
and whatever mechanism that drives you to is going to be the one that you focus on. So I mean, you look at okay, I mean, we can go back to the early 20th centuries, look at the KKK, right? What did it do? It drove them into secret meetings. It drove them into whatever ceremonies or whatnot they had, like what they had in Where Art Thou or something.
And a lot of them ended up in government.
Indeed they did. Indeed. And that's where I'm kind of going. Okay, yeah, we can ban Steven Crowder, we can ban whatever. It's just going to strengthen their resolve. It's going to strengthen their audience's resolve. And it's going to drive an innovation that really kind of hyper focuses that group. And some.
I hope so.
Well, I hope so. But at the same time, I hope not, because there are dangerous groups out there that will exploit that and harm people with it,
Which is why it is folly for particularly these platforms to try to create absolute fake safe spaces.
Absolutely.
Using algorithms, using whatever, because who is to dictate hate speech? Who dictate that? That's ultimately what frightens me. Who dictates?
Yep.
Who belongs and who doesn't belong?
Yeah. My site may contain offensive content. Well, who defines what that is?
Absolutely. And if you study history, that's been subjective over time.
It always is and always will be. Yeah. And yeah, you can't objectify something like that.
But what's happening right now is that is being used as the auspices for regulation.
Absolutely.
And it begins to set this dangerous precedent. So just to kind of round this out, there's a list of articles that the Verge has kind of brought together. That is what I like to call a running tally of statism on the march globally. This, particularly starting with the story about, that Facebook taking down the one propaganda video of Nancy Pelosi that was slowed down and kind of somewhat cut up to make her sound as if she was drunk or slurring her words and stuff like that. And on a side note, the fact that they kind of they outed this brother that might have uploaded a video and like tried to ruin his life essentially is egregious. What's even more egregious is Facebook acting as the snitch platform it is, openly giving this information to just a random journalist who asked.
Yeah.
So if a random journalist can go to Facebook and just ask, hey, who is this person? What's this person do? What do you think they're doing when the government comes, pounding on the door for that information? So that should give you pause. Not to mention the fact that all these social media, so not necessarily all these social media companies, all these journalists, and I use air quotes here with no one seeing, jumped on the immediate bandwagon of like, these are deep fakes. This is what is going to happen. This just shows that Facebook needs to do more about this and this. And what more can Facebook do? What more can Facebook do? Who is to decide who gets banished, right? I mean, and these people write these things, and they don't think that this could possibly come back to bite them.
Well, it's the immediate appeal to authority, and that's the cultural thing that I'm getting at earlier. Is there's this.
Yeah, you win.
It's this kind of knee jerk. Oh my God, somebody above me needs to take care of this and handle this because they're the authority in it. No, you know what? Handle it yourself. Analyze it. Put some thought into this instead of just doing this knee-jerk thing. Now, and it goes back to kind of what we have discussed before, is a lot of these knee-jerk reactions are functional in the sense that it riles up a certain audience and it riles up a certain customer base. So
who is that customer base, you think?
Well, it depends on who's doing the riling, right? I mean,
yeah,
what better way to get more business than to excite people who already like you? I mean, this is a common thing, right?
Yeah, no, I think they're being, particularly a lot of the social networks, are being hyper vigilant about disinformation campaigns, and at the same time, I think the Overton window of what is considered disinformation campaigns is so wildly skewed in really just one ideological direction. You just to kind of go through a list of all these kind of statism things, like Facebook facing, the most probes by Irish regulators when it comes to like the general data protection regulations, which I think are stupid. Right. I mean, the cost and unintended consequences of dealing with the GDPR, which is basically the General Data Protection Regulation.
Which is the nightmare of my existence.
It's the nightmare. I've also noticed every effing site I go to, I have to say, yes, I know you have cookies. Yes, that's annoying me.
Yeah.
And so here's so they've already had to deal with 55. There's already been 55, million euros in fines, 50 of which was a single fine to Google. Then you had to deal with 281,000 cases, 144,000 complaints, 889,271 data breach notifications. There's all it's got. I mean, this must be administratively impossible for companies to deal with.
It is, and I'll tell you something. From this, just from the little sliver that I'm involved with just basic data security, PCI compliance or EI3PA compliance or whatever it is. It basically demands 100% of your time, all of the time. And you're at the mercy of a third party to basically say, this is what you will do now, do it. And, fortunately for me, I mean, it's not a government entity telling me this. It's industry best practices, and it's
but it's being forced from a litigious point of view, because ultimately you could, in tort or any other type of legal setting, face huge fines or really bad press.
This is true.
And it's being pushed by government.
You know what? I'm selling my computers. I'm moving to the woods.
Yeah, no, I don't blame you, right? So I'm gonna actually this is probably a good thing. I'm gonna start doing this toward the end of the show, like just like the march toward statism.
I like it.
Like, so the video game, like that's called Player Unknown's Battleground, is like outlawed in parts of India. So coming from the article here, like playing a video game seems like a dubious grounds for arrest.
A video game is banned.
Yeah, like you can't play it.
A video game.
So here's the deal. So playing a video game may seem like a dubious grounds for arrest to a player unknown Battlegrounds fan and free internet advocates, but less than a week later, other parts of the Gujarat, including Ahmedabad, the state's largest city, and Vadodara, these Indian names, the third city, have banned the game, citing similar reasons, right? So basically, there's national hysteria around the game at a moment when Indians are struggling with the fallout from a rapid technological progress. Deadly, of course, overseas, like WhatsApp is used in a lot of places in India, like the spread rumors that cause like people to go out and form lynch mobs and kill people. And then there's rampant harassment on social media, which is nothing more than bullying moved to the 21st century, and dangerous misinformation campaigns, which is what's causing these, deadly riots and lynch mobs. The state has just said, well, you just can't play the game. That'll stop you.
Did you say arrests?
And arrests. This is correct. Because it's outlawed. Because, Gary, it's against the law.
But oh my God.
when the state says you can't play the video game no more, you can't play the video game no more, man.
Boy,
all right.
Yeah.
Next.
Anyway.
Next story. How China uses high-tech surveillance to subdue minorities, particularly using a lot of facial recognition technology. So here's the thing I love about our tech overlords. A lot of the technology that is being deployed to particularly sequester the Uyghur Muslims of Western China into concentration camps and re-education camps, they have no problem doing business with China, right? They have no problem doing business with China, and particularly even companies that not be directly connected to the Chinese government, but are connected to the Chinese government. But when the CIA comes calling to, hey, could you guys design an artificial intelligence? No, you guys are evil. Okay, then, be consistent, man. Like, don't give your technology to China or get in bed with Chinese tech companies that are basically using the technology to suppress their people. Now, I understand, like, the Chinese tech companies don't have a lot of choice in the matter.
Right.
But I don't know, man. It's just the state co-opting tech for its nefarious purposes. I mean, I actually read once someone saying like socialism could have worked better if Stalin would have had the technological prowess of like a Facebook or Google or whatever. It's just like, and everybody reacted to that story. It's like, no, it just would have made it. Stalin just would have got a higher score of racking up human bodies if he would have had the technology of Facebook and Google and stuff like that.
It's amazing.
There's just this blind spot for it. And let's see, a couple more here. Behind Grindr's doomed hookup in China, a data misstep in a scramble to make up. I guess Echo Wang and Carl O'Donnell have more details on why U.S. government is trying to undo the acquisition of a gay hookup app by a Chinese company. This is more the xenophobia, but then this might actually be kind of something to worry about. Like, so two former national security officials said that the acquisition heightened U.S. fears about the potential of data misuse at a time of tense Chinese-U.S. relations. The TYFYS, what the hell is, I don't know what that is, has increased its focus on the safety of personal data. In the last 2 years, it's blocked Chinese companies from buying money transfer company MoneyGram International. Really? They did? Oh, wow. I didn't know that. And mobile marketing app, AppLovin. Based in West Hollywood, California. Grindr is it especially popular among gay men and has about 4.5 million daily users. This nebulous alphabet soup organization likely worried that Grindr's database may include compromising information about personnel who work in areas such as military and intelligence, and that could end up in the hands of the Chinese government. Basically people who haven't come out as gay, who are in the military or intelligence organizations, could be blackmailed by the Chinese government. So, and then the last one, I love this one because I've been reading about this one for years. Google's shadow workforce. So apparently, nearly 50% of Google's employees are temp workers. They're not employees.
Doesn't surprise me necessarily.
I didn't know this. I thought this mainly just happened in general government contracting, but apparently a lot of Silicon Valley firms hire a ton of just off the books programmers, HR.
Well, it gets really weird. California in particular came up with a bunch of rules a couple of years ago that were intended to protect contract workers, and basically California came up with a bunch of definitions of technical workers where, above a certain percentage of their time is spent doing software development or system administration or whatever. And then the part that alarmed me, which was the part that impacted me directly and the employees that I have to handle, was they said, okay, if they fall into one of these definitions that we have defined based on their observations within Silicon Valley, probably, and they don't make this much money of a salary, you must handle them as an hourly employee this way and track their information this way and do all this. So basically, I mean, Silicon Valley has a long history of exploiting underpaid temp workers. I mean, this is really nothing new in my mind.
Yeah, I've heard about it for 2 or 3 years. I just didn't. I heard about it 10 years ago when the fear of H-1B visas and outsourcing to India was a big scare.
And I don't know. I mean, it always is a big scare, especially with Trump. I mean, that's his big thing, right? We're only going to bring in the best and the brightest. Whatever.
I think I've always been one who's never been super xenophobic when it comes to bringing in talent from overseas. I think the H-1B visa system is just another status attempt to limit the free movement of people and free exercise of their labor.
It clearly is. I mean,
and if it displaced workers here, I mean, I'm not to be heartless and unconcerning for the workers that are here. I understand that they feel marginalized. Yeah. But this is globalization. This is the dark side, of globalization that's necessary to get us where we are.
Well, and a lot of it, though, I mean, if you look at it from a supply and demand standpoint, right, or from a labor supply standpoint, if there is a gigantic labor supply of developers or coders or whatever, okay, I'm going to hire a bunch of temps, because throwing more bodies at this thing
for a temporary period of time to solve a very specific problem is actually a lot more profitable, and from a fiduciary standpoint, better.
Right. And I don't fault any company for doing any of that practice. I mean, and ultimately, if I, as a software developer, accept, okay, these are the terms of my engagement with you, I'm going to be working for you for 3 months and then we're done. Okay, well, then that's on me.
Yeah. And I think what the problem is, from the 2 articles I wrote, I read from Business Insider, from I think New York Times, it was just it's more of the culture associated with that. Your gray badges versus your real badges. In this instance, your red badges versus your regular badges.
Sure.
Of Google employees, and how that cultural kind of segregation makes it harder for these temp workers who are oftentimes integrated into these internal Google teams, have no access to internal Google memos or forums, or even access to data sets they need to even accomplish their job. And and that's funny, because it almost kind of removes a veneer of this elitism that Silicon Valley sort of exudes, when it comes to the best. We hire the best and the brightest at our company. For the love of God, man, if half your workers are temp workers, and if those in a great majority, or at least a plurality of those workers are treated like utter garbage, you're going to invite more rules, which I find, it almost seems to me that these rules were put into place. Companies reacted to this. And so this issue I'm reading about these temp workers is just, I don't know, it's just a symptom of the reaction that a regulation basically put into place. And so the companies reacted accordingly. It doesn't help that we make our workers terribly expensive.
Right.
And so, if you hire a full-time employee that's a full-time Googler, I mean, it's good. That's great. But in the Valley, I'm pretty sure it costs $250,000 to $500,000 a year to hire a person and to employ that person.
Yeah.
Right. And if it costs only $150,000 to $200,000 to hire a contract worker to do this temporary work that you need done in the AI section, the cloud section, the map section, or whatever, so be it. Yeah, I read the same thing about a year ago about Apple. Apple does the same thing. And I guess, I was unaware that it was a generally accepted practice around the Valley that a vast majority, or almost half of some of these companies' workforces are temps.
Yeah. Yeah, it's common. I mean, 10 years ago, I was working for Capital One, and we did the same thing. It was just throw more bodies at it, and that's what they do, And they'll hire them on for 2 months, and that's it. Yeah.
That's the way of the world. It's the way of the world. So, we're coming to the end because we've been going a little long, but I don't care. I had a lot to get off my chest. Moving on, and any closing thoughts? I mean, if we look at some of the stories at the bottom, I mean that the unhackability of a Corvette, it was kind of an interesting thing, and then of course Microsoft's modern OS, which is going the way of Chrome OS. I found that actually very, very interesting, and then of course there was a huge Google outage last week, for about 2 or 3 hours. The conspiracy theory going around is that Zero Hedge, in particular, my favorite site for outlandish stuff, is did the government test the kill switch last week for the internet?
That's hilarious.
Oh, Zero Hedge. I love you, Zero Hedge. You're crazy.
The kill switch.
Oh, man. Yeah, the kill switch this week. So this week I guess is E3. Last week was WWDC for Apple. This week is E3. So hopefully when we record again, man, we'll have some we'll be able to geek out on some video game stuff. But no announcements so far, man. And and also pour a little out for iTunes.
Oh darn!
Good riddance. Good riddance. We hardly knew you. All right. Anything else?
No. I'm gonna sign off here shortly and go enjoy some time with the family and hopefully get some sleep tonight.
Yeah. Well, go have yourself a good night kiss. Drink it up. This has been Thank You for Your Servers. I'm Nick Way, aka Thaddeus Preston. I guess I said that backwards. I'm at Nick Way on Twitter, and Gary we'll have to work on in the next couple of weeks. You to get some sort of Twitter handle so we can pimp this show together.
At something.
This broadcast and others. Yeah, you can be at something, right? So this broadcast and others are brought to you by the Make Liberty Great Again Network of podcasts. Thank you for your servers. We're logging off. Peace.